Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. We would like to take of the annual investment meeting webinar series. Today, we are presenting Ensuring Food Security and Sustainability Against Pandemic, Innovation and Business Opportunities of Agriculture in SMEs. My name is Karen Pizon, Investor Relations for AIM, and I'll be your MC for today. The annual investment meeting is the largest investment platform in the world. An initiative of the UAE Ministry of Economy, AIM has been promoting a healthier global economy by linking investment opportunities to fast-growing economies under 6 key pillars: foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investment, small and medium enterprise, startups, and future cities, with special event, One Belt, One Road. We would like to thank our multilateral partner, Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector, for sponsoring today's webinar. The webinar is also sponsored by Etihad Credit Insurance, the U.S. Federal Export Credit Company. Etihad Credit Insurance provides solutions guaranteed to help UAE exporters and businesses navigate through this difficult time. To find out more about EZI offerings, please email info@ezi.gov.ae. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you experience any issues with your audio or video during the webinar, just refresh your browser and that would take care of everything. We would suggest using Chrome, Firefox, or Opera. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you like a special question, vote for it under the question tab so we can address it to our speakers. Right now, we're running live polls located beside the question tab. We request you to participate by casting your votes. In today's webinar, our speakers will have a crucial discussion on the innovation and innovative agriculture technologies and how the pandemic has evolved in the economy and industry, what are the challenges faced nowadays, and explore how to seize the business opportunities in agriculture sector to advance sustainability. I would now like to introduce the moderator for today's webinar, Mr. Matthew de Klerk, who is the partner of Oliver Wyman. Mr. Matthew is a partner in the public policy practice based in Dubai with 15 years of consulting experience, 8 years in the Middle East. Areas of expertise include economic and social development strategy in government, R&D and innovation, commercialization. He handles food security and agri-tech strategy for GCC country and investment strategy for a SWF in agri and food technology, several due diligence. He will be joined by a panel of experts, and without further ado, we will turn the time over to our wonderful speakers. And Mr. Matthew, please come on stage.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I assume everybody can hear us well. And without due notice, I guess I will invite some of our esteemed participants to the stage, maybe starting with the name, who is joining us as Secretary General of the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture. She's based in Dubai, and she has obviously a lot of experience, more than 20 years in the field. And we are very to have her with us today. He is very keen to enlighten us of what's going on in the world in terms of new innovation, alternative approach that will help us to address the challenge of today. Please, Dr. Ismail, welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Do you want me to go ahead now?
No, let me maybe just bring everybody on stage, and then we will move forward. Yes. Then I'm also very pleased to have Eren, which hopefully I'll pronounce the last name well, Collective. With 20 years of professional investment experience. He has been and is now with the African Development Bank, has been focusing quite a lot on food and agriculture, and has been working a lot also with small and medium enterprise and entrepreneur with the Islamic Cooperation for the Development. And we look forward to have his view on the latest investment trends in that specific sectors.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone.
All right. Then we are joined with one of our serial local entrepreneur, Abdulaziz Al-Moula, which is the CEO and the founder of Madar Farm, one of the most innovative food tech company here in the region and probably globally. He has been quite passionate with that topic for quite a while, and have been working with many governments as a consultant before he saw probably the demand and decided to jump into the entrepreneur world and launch his own business. Abdulaziz, we welcome you today, and we will happily hear about your stories as well.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity, and hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes. And last but not least, we have Salvatore Lavallo, who is the lead of the Abu Dhabi Investment Office for all the agri-tech sectors. He's, of course, understand the sector from an investment, but also from an attraction point of view, because obviously we know that Abu Dhabi is very keen, as the UAE as well, to grow that sector, and there are several programs ongoing. So we welcome his views on the sector and on the investment climate from the region.
Thank you, guys.
What I would like to do before we start the panel discussion, and I can see the counter still rising with 100 plus participants, we had planned 3 quick polls for the audience, which hopefully will give us a little bit of a view of what or their participants are thinking, and what is a starting point, which we can then use to reflect upon as we go to the different discussion. Maybe we can launch the first polls, which you know is on the pool section on your chat. You will see the different questions, and I guess it's self-explanatory. You just pick up the answer that you believe is right, and you read the first questions. What are the main challenges to support investment in the sector? Obviously, today is about agri-tech and food and technologies. And you can, I guess, select which is the one that is the most relevant from your point of view, and then submit your vote. The second question is, in the light of the current context with regards to food security and sustainability, what will drive the coming years? I mean, we are in a very unique period, and I would like to get maybe people's views about those challenges. And the last questions, again, in the current days and the context, what do you expect from food security and sustainability in terms of investment? Once you submit, I guess our colleagues from the AEM will share with us the answer, and then we can start our panel. Dear colleagues of the AEM, are you sharing the answer, or do they come automatically? I can still see some people putting.
Sorry, if you can just go to the polls tab, which is right next to the questions tab. The polls are running live right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you presenting the answer on the screen, or we just have to?
It's there on the screen. It's there for the audience and
okay.
everybody to view.
Okay, so I'll assume that everybody has been voting, and if some votes are still coming in, the trends are coming in. So what are the main challenges to support investment in the sectors? Technology readiness and maturity comes first as one of the points, and I think we will have to cover those points as well. And then in a group of number 2, we have complex supply chains and commercial viability and the subsidies, and the lack of international policy collaboration coming on the top of that questions. In the second question, in light of the current context with regards to food security and sustainability, what will drive the coming years is the increased investment from venture capital and private sector in the startups will be seen as one of the major driver. And in the last question, with a large majority in the current context, what do you expect from food security and sustainability in terms of investment? Is that significant growth, more than 20%? So everybody should be excited about that compared to the past years. All right. I guess the question will remain open and will be shared at the end if there is some significant change. But I'd like to maybe then kick off the panel discussion, as we have not a lot of time, and we want to make sure that we extract as much input from the great guest and expert we have on the panel. Maybe to start with the first question to Dr. Ismail, is that from, of course, your extensive experience, you probably can enlighten us in your view of what are the biggest challenge going forward. Obviously, there is a lot of buzzwords that have come out of the crisis, but there are also obviously some systemic underlying issues and opportunities. We would like to maybe get a bit of your view on that specific question. You may need to unmute you.
Yeah. So thank you first for the inclusion in this exciting panel. From my perspective, the challenges that we have in the system are numerous. The challenges when you talk about worldwide global food system, worldwide global food security, water security issues. I mean, the challenges that really come to mind when you look at the global picture is that we are a growing population with much less resources than last 100 years ago. So the demand is increasing while the resources that existed 100 years ago have reduced dramatically because of lack of control on the way we have been using resources. We have been, I think the last generation, ours and the X generation and the Y and the 2, 3 before, have really withdrawn from the resources too much in terms of water, in terms of nutrient inputs and so on and so forth. So the challenges that we have right now is that we are in a planet that is at the borderline. We are overusing it. We have a climate change which is up on us and we all know it. We might debate the amplitude and how much, but it's a certitude now, it's known now that it's happening. And one of the very certain impact is heat. So the planet as a whole, it's heating at least by 1.5 degrees. Some region might heat up by 4 or by 3. Some might decrease as well. But in the grand scheme of things, the whole planet is heating up. And by heating the planet, it means you need more water to produce the same thing. So the evapotranspiration of plant will demand more water. So we have really to think our food system. It's a time in history whereby we could save it, we could help by bringing in the right food system to different ecosystems. So we should stop eating the same, we should stop producing the same, and we should have innovations that fits the ecosystem. So we have to think globally, and not only on the aspect of productivity or the aspect of a country. It has to be a little bit more global. And that's where the dichotomy is. We need more than ever international cooperation and international guidance. And we are at a time where that system is breaking out. The UN system is breaking out, and many of the organizations are at not their best, be it WTO or other organizations. So I leave it at that, Mathieu, and I can add up later on.
No, thank you. A lot of very strong statement here that I'm sure will raise a lot of questions and potential further debate when you are saying like some systems are broken out and we need more cooperation. These are two things that in today's times of geopolitics are obviously very interesting. Maybe, Aaron, you may also share some views and some thoughts from your end of what you see some of the biggest challenge and set up the context of why are we discussing even this today.
Yeah, thank you, Mathieu. First of all, I like to highlight here the fact that I'm entering into the subject from an African angle. And the first thing I'd like to mention here is that agribusiness is actually massive in Africa with an incomparable social and economic footprint. So just to bring things in the context, Africa is about 60% of the world's arable land, 75% of the world cocoa production, 55% of cassava, but also it's a sector or a subsector which is employing 60% of the total population in sub-Saharan Africa. For most of them, these are smallholder farmers, and represents actually a quarter of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP, which has a potential that we can consider yet as untapped. That being said, there are numerous challenges in the agri side in Africa, and these are actually spanning from the lack of infrastructure, the lack of skills, sometimes a weak institutional environment, a weak support systems, bureaucracy, lack of market intelligence, and so on and so forth. As mentioned, previously, actually the global regulatory environment is also not always conducive, with the challenge of facing sometimes dumping from countries where the agricultural space is actually heavily subsidized. However, if I had to focus on the biggest challenge, I would clearly retain and mention here that this is the production efficiency and the scale. This is especially, the case in agro-processing, and agriculture in Africa has historically been the recipient for donor money and donor investments. And that had created activities according to the donor's agenda and not to the demand, not well adapted to the local specificities, and not sustainable enough to go beyond the startup phase. So also that phase, has been very important in terms of mobilizing these, inceptive capital and resources. Agriculture has yet to be seen as a business and treated as such. And SMEs are the backbone of the agricultural revolution. 80% of the food produced in Africa is actually managed by the private sector, with 40% only in primary production. So the value chains are extremely active, spanning from processing, distribution, transport, and food services, all prominently led by the SMEs. So handling the challenges and the difficulties related to the ecosystem, as well as boosting the efficiency and scale up, are, from my angle, the main challenges for the ag space.
Thank you, Aaron. And again, a lot of points that could be debate, discussion on and building as well on Dr. Ismail. You stress again the challenge of donor, giver, and systems, ecosystems, challenge that need to be rebalanced. The role of SME, very, very important. And while we will come back to the role of what a government and policymaker can do to address the change, I'd like now to shift completely on the other side of the paradigm and look at people that are trying to make a change in the current setup by bringing some new innovation and technology, and SME that are trying to move out in that broader context. And maybe this is where, Abdulaziz, you will tell us how you didn't wait for the system to be fixed to actually build upon something that is water efficient and that can be scale up and then maybe Salvatore, you will after that follow up about what Abu Dhabi has been doing. I mean, there's been some announcement of your recent development with new technology. So let's bring that examples now to the equation, and then we'll see how we bring the global challenge and the entrepreneurial world together.
Yeah, thanks. And I love that introduction because it a little bit bypasses the fact of our biggest challenge we faced when we first started. It wasn't really around technology. It wasn't really around support or that the market. It's really around awareness. People didn't realize how big a problem we were facing, and they didn't realize that things could be done. Whenever we have somebody visit one of our farms, there's always this lighting up moment, because they look at it and they say, this is something we thought would happen in Europe or something that would happen somewhere else, because we're used to seeing farms there. In the country, in the region that we're in, we're very much coming from a difficult environment and a lower benchmark, but especially with the recent support and the big trend of people getting more interested in this space, we have an opportunity to leapfrog. We have an opportunity to build systems, not just for today or for the next 5 years, but something that's truly resilient over a long term. We're very much focused on sustainable production. One of the challenges, as our colleagues have just pointed out, is the fact that we've been used to doing stuff for so long in a certain way that the wastage and the damage to the environment has really put us in the situation where we are. And so making sure that anything we do is sustainable, the fact that we can grow in a place that we couldn't before, or we can grow things that we couldn't before, all while doing it in line with the environment and giving something that's healthier, that's better. It's a winning recipe, really. But
I
none of
don't know
it.
if everybody is familiar with your technology. So in a short 1 minute, if you can just describe. I'm very familiar, but I prefer to hear it from the master.
Sure, of course. So we're very much focused on sustainable agricultural technologies. Right now, we're introducing CEA, or Controlled Environment Agriculture, where we're building fully indoor farms. So instead of growing outdoors, we grow indoors hydroponically, and that means inside water. That means we can recycle the water, reuse it. We don't need soil. We're not limited on the land. But more importantly, that allows us to go indoors. And so we seal off from the outside environment, which means we don't need to use any pesticides or insecticides or any of the chemicals that modern agricultural systems have become dependent on. And by being indoors, we have an opportunity to optimize. We control the environment, oxygen, temperature, carbon dioxide, and lighting is all provided with LED lights, where the light is specified completely to the type of plant. So not only do we grow in a sustainable way, but we actually maximize everything that comes with that.
And to you, Salvatore, this is something that, of course, at the investment office of Abu Dhabi and the broad region, you are looking at this kind of shift to new technology. I mean, the UAE has an agriculture, but probably not as extensive as an economic sector as our colleagues in Africa or other part of the world. So you can probably take a different approach. How do you see that shift to new form of technology and how it's going to basically drive more investment and more innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the investment office, we're really looking at how can we provide support and incentives to innovative companies that are doing R&D or that are bringing visionary new technologies into spaces such as agriculture. And we're looking at how can we help these businesses of any size that are coming in and try to enable and catalyze their ambitions and their growth, and then work to have a comprehensive range of services that we can offer them, not only as an investment office through cash and non-cash incentives, but as a whole Abu Dhabi government, working with all the different ecosystems to enable a full system of support for the players that are like Abdulaziz, that are in Abu Dhabi, that are trying to make this change. And ultimately, what we're really looking at is a government-wide Abu Dhabi commitment to driving innovation in various sectors, but specifically in desert agriculture, kind of contributing to this long-term goal of how can we turn the desert green.
Mm-hmm. And maybe back to you, Aaron. I mean, how do you see some of those new technology coming to Africa as a proxy of emerging market that might not necessarily have that first technology brand associated to them and have a very strong legacy systems? Will that be also some of part of the next coming years revolution in those areas?
Yeah, I think, one of my colleagues here mentioned something which is very, very important here, and which is, leapfrogging. So Africa has actually now the opportunity to gain many, many years, and in some regions actually within the continent, I would say that, coming from Europe, actually, some markets from a technological perspective are more advanced than Western Europe, actually. So, definitely, the tech or the agtech devices and agtech in general is offering multiple and set of opportunities for investment. And these are very broad, it's ranging from digital solutions to rethinking the distribution chains, all the AI-linked technologies, the real-time data access, the dedicated instruments to actually optimize better water and nutrition, amounts, and definitely, seed science, or even and you would be surprised that in the southern part of Africa, actually, you do even have companies which are deploying now solutions for plant-based meat or cell-based meat, which is sometimes in some European markets almost a taboo, right? So so definitely leapfrogging opportunities is there for Africa.
Yeah, and Dr. Ismail, you mentioned in your introduction all the multilateral and international corporations, the UN. I mean, these are institution that we hope, I'm sure all of us, that works better for the greater good, but they also have proven that they need, even in the most optimistic time to restructure themselves. Then we see entrepreneur and technology will not wait for those ones. So how is your view? Will technology and solution come before the actual institutional setup, or how can institutional setup be motivated by some of those technology disruption?
So I think, Mathieu, those institutions were supposed to facilitate. So they are not the doers per se, they are facilitator, coordinator. And sincerely, private sector has been put on the side for the longest time. I think with the Global Development Agenda 2030 and with the SDGs, we realize more than ever that only the private sector can do it. Public service and public sector cannot continue carry on. And that's why I think they have gone beyond their mandate. Now they have to go back to their mandate and really facilitate, instigate, and so on and so forth. So private sector has to come on board. And for the private sector to come on board, I think for the longest time, we have been gone too much global. Only the big companies can make it. We have not nurtured startup. We have not nurtured enough local companies or regional companies. And they see that in Africa. In Africa, it's huge, and the problem is going to be very big. Right now, the import in Africa, it's about $35 billion. By 2025, which is 5 years down the road or less, it's going to be $110 billion. So whereas it is known that Africa has the major arable land that has not been tapped into. So there is a dichotomy there, and I think many of the government should really incentivize their private sector. They should have the private sector to come on board and take accountability and responsibility as well. So those technologies, we see them here and there. Even in Africa, we know that there are some areas that are very developed, but we don't have what I call always the critical mass. We need the critical mass. You can't have one or two or three little examples. You need a critical mass to bring in a food system and have it that is beneficial for the country, for the people, and for the planet. And as Abdulaziz said, for the longest time, resilience and sustainability wasn't really the most important criteria. Whereas we see now better understanding from the government, from the international institution of the importance of sustainability and resilience. And we see as well that particularly water in most of the region, be it in the GCC country, be it in North Africa, be it in Sub-Saharan Africa, in many of the region, and even Australia and Canada, water is one of the limiting factors, and finding a way around it to increase our productivity in a resilient, sustainable way, it's very important. And that's if I see too much copy-paste here and there, and I think we should stop that as well. Many of the technologies that work for the North does not work for the South. So this is geography, this is how the planet is, and we need that innovation to be customized in many parts of the world, be it plant breeding, be it for agriculture system, irrigation system, and so on.
Yes, and as we saw in our pool's questions, there was a lot of question of the technology maturity and the commercial scalability of those technology. Some of those exist for quite some time. Some of them are put to the market. Abdulaziz is there to witness. I think your colleagues of Abu Dhabi, you have a current agreement with Arrow Farms. There are other things that are coming more and more. How do we see the scale up, and how do we see the role of private sector to bring and address some of those challenges of technology and commercial viability? And maybe Salvatore, you may start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think what's interesting, to Aaron's point as well, is that we're really looking for cutting edge solutions that are not only locally relevant to Abu Dhabi, but that really can be globally exportable, because the problems that we're facing here in Abu Dhabi are problems that are faced all around the world. And so we really need to enable the private sector companies that are coming with these solutions. And ag tech is something that is much more complex than what people often will perceive it to be. There are very, intractable problems that exist in looking at what do you grow, how do you grow it, what's the business format, in order to look at it. It's not one size fits all, neither for the geography that you're in, the business model that you're in, or the that you're growing. So what we're looking at is really how can we build out a broad ag tech ecosystem that enables different entrepreneurs to come in and bring those ideas and also make it an exportable technology. How do we also then look at the food quality and also the food variety so that we can expand the supply of sustainable food in Abu Dhabi and globally? And then also looking more at the economic input, how can these lead to new jobs and economies of the future and have these kind of highly skilled jobs? So what we always try and do is to have a support throughout the whole value chain. So we have, for example, we've just launched enhanced Musataha, long-term land lease agreements for the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, which allows flexibility and competitiveness for the land use policies that investors are seeing in Abu Dhabi. We also have, as you mentioned, an incentive program where we give rebates to companies like AeroFarms, like Madar Farms, as well as others. And then we also do we make sure that it's not that we have an agreement with a company and then we leave them. We have really robust investor care and investor concierge and relationship management services that really add that kind of the non-financial incentives to partner with the government, but really all with the idea in mind of supporting the private sector and taking those ideas and those innovations and enabling them to go further.
And maybe from you, Abdulaziz, I mean, you were in the region. You had some support, I guess, from the government, but there is still a massive market out there. How can you, from your point of view, maybe illustrate where the government did help well, or can do better going forward to help you scale up?
If you'd asked me that question a few years ago, it would have been a little bit different than now. I think what we've seen over the last few years is a big focus on food security, on local sustainability. You've seen my friend Sal, for example, at ADIO, that's been set up. They have a dedicated fund towards this. And very importantly, something that's focused on R&D. The knowledge base, not here, globally for this space, is still very new. And so knowledge creation is a key component of that. We've got a Ministry of Food Security been set up as well, and that's a first as well on a global basis. So I think the support that you find now is incredibly high, allows us to accelerate change. But the gap that we're seeing, and our colleague from ICBA flagged this, is there aren't enough doers. Look at the challenges that we face when we work with the investor care team at ADIO and we tell them about this challenge or hurdle. It's very rarely something about technology or something about growing itself. It almost always has to do with business development or some external issue. And I think people's perception when they look at this, and especially when it's something that they don't quite understand, is they think that it's inaccessible. And in fact, it's very much so. My background was in banking and consulting, and I managed to transition into this space. And today we're leading a lot of the R&D efforts here on the ground. It's more about getting out there. It's more about doing, rather than it is, I think, getting a little bit taken aback by the technology.
Yes, and maybe to Dr. Isman, another question that we talk a lot about here on the production side, but it's an entire system. There is food security, food waste, supply chain. Where do we see also more innovation and more potential room for private sector investment in the entire value chain, and moving maybe a little bit out of just the pure production that Abdulaziz just explained us from the farm that he's leading? I guess we have some connection issue with the term. Maybe Aaron, you might have some views on that from your experience again on an African but broader emerging market. We heard about food waste in India. I'm sure there is similar issue. There is regulation, standard, a lot of things that need to be done. Cold chain.
Yeah, I mean, yes, food waste, on the cycle of wasting food, the main challenge as far as the African continent is concerned is really mostly on the post-harvest loss. So this is, really where the challenge is. And, I think from that angle, there is a need for the developing world probably to catch up. In terms of the gap between demand and production. So in that sense, if you take the existing models that we have, and if you take a focus on sub-Saharan Africa, you're actually, you can very easily assess that the continent will actually need 8 times more fertilizer, probably 6 times more improved foods, and at least 8 billion of investment in basic storage, as much as 65 billion in irrigation, just to fulfill the agricultural promise. And you cannot do that actually without de-risking the market for the private sector to get in and to heavily invest equity and technology and knowledge and added value to the continent. The investments, I mean, it's always nice to have the vitrine of ag tech, devices, startups raising, being very successful in raising money. But there is also a big need for basic infrastructure, to make actually the ag space working, such as roads, ports, electricity, improvement in the policies, and in the intra-regional trade flows. The rising urbanization and the growth of the middle class, especially in urban areas, is basically representing almost 700 billion in terms of markets projected for 2025. So of that growth, probably 200 billion is about to be solely dedicated to food and beverages. So a majority of that will be coming from sub-Saharan Africa. So urban consumers are expected to consume more fresh produce, dairy, meat, and processed food relative to their rural counterparts. So in that context, if we do believe that emerging markets, frontier markets, and especially the African markets are to play a greater role in supplying local food demands, I mean, then it will be important to improve cost competitiveness for food crops, not only for cash crops, compared with the major trading partners. So sub-Saharan Africa has actually, demonstrated a lot of successes in some cash crops, like cashews, coffee, processed horticulture, tea in the eastern part of Africa, cocoa in West Africa. But even, for some of those crops, like cocoa, for example, we can consider that the cost of production in Africa are probably the lowest in the world. And this is the case in Côte d'Ivoire or Ghana. However, the same is not necessarily true for food crops. And that's where the challenge is. And for which, the yield improvements alone are often not enough to improve cost competitiveness. And rice, for example, is a very good example for that. So in this context, the private sector needs to intervene in order to produce more, process more, and decrease, the level of imports, and support the local food security. Let me just give you a figure very, very quickly. 75% of the world cocoa is produced in Africa, okay? And actually, most of that is stemming from Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. However, those two countries and the sub-Saharan region only represent 2% of the global 100 billion revenue generated on a yearly basis by chocolate industry.
Yes.
And so this is giving you really, a snapshot of, where we are and where we need to invest in. For coffee, it's the same. The 1.5 billion that is generated in the continent is actually doubled by 2 in terms of revenue by Germany, who is basically importing, processing, and exporting the products. So the future opportunities do not really lie in extending the volume of arable land, as mentioned beforehand, but rather in gaining efficiency and increasing the added value. And that maybe come from the private sector.
Yeah, and maybe as we get Dr. Ismail back online, in the last couple of years, we have here, especially from the region, massive land bank reservation in Africa and a lot of those investment. We also hear from Erin and from all of you some big numbers in terms of market and opportunities. But to the latest I checked, and maybe Abdulaziz has a better view than me, but if you look at the overall share of private equity, VC, and sovereign wealth fund investment in that sector, it's still very, very small compared to some of the other sectors, while the market are potential. Why hasn't the private sector investment not yet really jump on some of those numbers that you mentioned? Maybe Dr. Ismail, you don't know if you follow us with the disconnection, but this is maybe something that we want to bring in a more global discussion here on how we make that private sector more in sync with the demand.
So I'm not really an expert on private sector, but what I'm hearing from my colleagues, it's really about the security investments. So there's always a huge question mark in terms of new technologies or new countries or some countries in Africa. What I want to really bring attention to myself throughout the value chain is that we need to create new food systems. So not only Africa and other countries in the South should do the whole value chain and should get into the food processing per se and the post-harvest and processing, but also we have to create new food systems. Like quinoa a few years ago, nobody knew about it. Chia a few years ago, nobody knew about it. Millet is coming back in Senegal and many other places. So we have to diversify and go to what we call ourselves alternative crops that you grow with alternative waters. So this alternative food systems was not part of the agenda. And I think really that's where money could be, because bringing back the millet in Senegal, for example, instead of producing right now the rice, for example, will give them maybe higher productivity and higher income for the farmers and for the country. So I think really now we have to play it smart, and the novelty of certain crops could bring really the add value. The chocolate, it's a known example, unfortunately, Erin, that's really, it's a huge debate there that I don't think Africa can grasp much of the existing market, because there's a huge lobby that is protecting it. But maybe or you go to quinoa, or you go to onion, or you go to the teff. Those are that are unknown, but they are so healthy, they're so good for that we can bring them back. So I think myself, both the government policies have to align with sustainability resilience, which would take them to alternative cropping systems, like the ones I mentioned. And the private sector has to be incentivized. And that's, again, national regulation, government have a just to encourage them. I think that's invested in quinoa a few years ago, and you saw most countries like Denmark, Canada, US, Germany quinoa back in 2012, 2013. So those are going to be ahead of the curve in the next few years. We started a breeding program here for the UAE and for the countries that we serve, mostly in the region and in Africa and in Southeast Asia and Central Asia. So we started a program back in 2007 because that's our bread and butter. We knew about the potential of these crops and that the climate change and the ecosystems like it. I think we have to rethink and quite highly. I'm not in a house, so it's not my bell.
Apologies.
All right. I know we want to leave the floor for questions for the participants, so I like to do a last quick round with all of you. And again, this is an investment conference, and maybe starting with Salvatore. How do we stay ahead of the curve? I mean, this is what you do all the time, I guess, as a profession. Where is the head of the curve in that sector, and what would be your recommendation and your advice for a broad participant in terms of keeping a good eye on opportunities for these sectors?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I think in Abu Dhabi, we've focused on a few subsectors within agriculture technology. So indoor farming technology, looking at advanced desalination, about ways that we can make energy sources more cost competitive, and also looking specifically at the vertical farms and closed environment agriculture, like Abdulaziz was mentioning. We're also looking at precision agriculture and agrobotics. So what are the solutions that can help farmers to minimize the resource utilization in terms of water, energy, land as well? what we've found is that although we are focused on building up the private sector, we really do have to create that ecosystem of enablement and being an ear to the private sector so that we can influence the government regulations and the policies. For example, we have the preferred agriculture land allocations, we have favorable tariff structures for agricultural companies, we try and make sure there's low operating cost inputs, and making sure that all of the different players from the research, the universities such as UAEU College of Agriculture, NYU Abu Dhabi, for example, as well as the other government ministry, like Ministry of Food Security, Abu Dhabi and Agriculture Food Security Authority, that we are all working together on streamlining approvals and testing and piloting for any of this new R&D innovations. I like to say that we don't make the market, we catalyze it. And so what we're interested in is any innovator that is looking to expand in Abu Dhabi or to grow in Abu Dhabi, we are open to them doing that, and we will make their money go further, and we'll provide those cash and non-cash incentives. And I think it's really about allowing the private sector to ideate the solutions and then ensuring that the public sector is facilitating.
Maybe Abdulaziz, if again, how do we stay ahead of the curve? If we meet in 5 years, what can we reflect upon?
I think most important is to have a feedback loop and to always kind of plan. A perfect example was COVID. When it happened in the UAE, and hotels and restaurants, which we used to sell exclusively to, closed down. Our sales went to zero overnight. We managed to go direct to retail for the first time within the next 2 weeks. Today, we're expanding our product line. We're able to have a touch base with the customer, and we've been able to turn that into a positive for us. But we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have a great feedback loop in place, and if we weren't always listening for opportunities, and we weren't always feeding that back and asking ourselves, how can we do this better?
I like that. Thank you. Erin, same question for you. How do we stay ahead of the curve? What's coming next?
Well, given the increase expected in global population of about, I think it's the projections are about an additional 2 billion in the next 30 years. I think, and that was mentioned, all of that will continue to strain a lot the land and the water resources, and basically put pressure on the countries to work together. So I would not say that, if we were to meet again, we would be celebrating a total full disruption in ag, but I would say more of an enhancement or a replacement by a model which would be more resource efficient for the same nutrition amount, and environmentally friendly, and of course more inclusive.
Yes, and maybe for you also, Dr. Ismail, maybe some few thoughts about staying ahead of the curve. I mean, I know there are some big agenda item, food system summit coming and other things, so a lot of more platform for discussion. What can we expect and how we can continue shaping that agenda? You mute.
Lulu has to unmute me. Yeah. Okay. So I think I see a lot of innovation coming on the light chain. It has been mentioned by Salvatore. I think the vertical farming, indoor farming, gonna pick up a lot in the mega cities. And right now, one of the roadblocks is really the energy cost. So I think new lighting that costs much less and do better than LED is needed, because LED was for human, it wasn't for plants. So I think
we lost Dr. Ismail. We'll wait for her to come back. No, I think we want to open the floor to some questions of the audience, which have been posted into the question, and I have been looking at them and picking some of those. Maybe one for you for other Chris back. For Erin, one of the questions was where. We have been talking, and Dr. Ismail mentioned the same. There was a lot of new corps. I mean, you talk about the challenge of some of the existing groups, but there are a lot of new things that are coming, and then there is new technology coming that maybe can take some of those new corps as well to the next stage. How do we make sure the private sector feel incentivized into some of maybe perceive more risky new corps when there might not be a market yet? What can be done to help the private sector to cross the bridge? Well, I was an example on the question board.
Yeah, I mean, you see, from our perspective, we are acting as a development institution. So our role is to be a catalyst in those markets. So basically, make the environment friendly enough for the private sector to agree taking the equity risk and expansion risk on those markets. So our work is mostly on, on the policy and enabling environment side, as well as, on actually putting our money at stake very early phase into those projects to then syndicate and put other private investors around the table. So we do a lot of greenfield projects from that angle. We do take the market risk in order to because in many of those you can't have an offtake agreement actually when you don't have even the first stone of the manufacturing entity set. We do provide a certain I would say comfort of being a publicly held institution in countries where sometimes projecting beyond 2 cycles of elections are kind of challenging. That could be from the land perspective, from a currency perspective. So we put soft capacity building and also financial tools, in a blended way, in motion in order to make sure that that becomes interesting enough for the private sector to come in.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ismail. You got cut. I don't know if you can still connect with us back to maybe answer the question about how do we get the private sector to go into some of those new alternative technology crops and new type of water and related component.
Incentivize.
Yeah, we are losing you. We're not going to be able, I guess, to get you back. We'll see how it goes. One other question, and that's maybe for you, maybe Salvatore. There was some question coming from the audience about country aiming to become self-sustainable, and maybe Abdulaziz might add a view. Is it even practical, or should we work more as a system and figure out how we work all the different pieces? So how do we get a linkage between maybe some of the national agenda and the investment priority? Abdulaziz, you feel maybe to contribute?
Sure. So I think the most important thing is to understand that there isn't really a copy-paste perfect solution for every single problem. Depending on where you are, depending on what particular problem you're addressing, there's going to be a different approach. Even if we were to think of something as simple as growing 2 different crops, you'll need 2 different approaches. So you can magnify that out when you start thinking about how local your needs are. So I think first and foremost is finding the pressing need, and very soon thereafter, you're going to find the support. I think what the challenge is, especially in media, is we tend to glorify a particular solution, or we tend to glorify a particular aspect or this technology, and we don't really talk about practical use. So I think the most important thing is if you find a problem that's big enough and that's pressing enough, and you find a solution that's practically applicable, we're going to see that kind of gap catch up. We're already seeing it now. I think that trend's just going to continue.
Thank you very much. I'm inviting all the public to pose a question, so I can pick a few and share it back to the audience. And maybe one question for you, Erin, is that some of the different countries in Africa, Africa is huge, meaning some countries have much better infrastructure, roads, some have less, some have employment. I mean, they all have employment issue, but all have very different scale of those issues. So how does that create opportunity for investment? There are some countries that are probably more ready than other ones. What's your view?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you take the African continent, and if you want to limit the amount of risk you're taking versus the amount of technology and readiness you have on the market, you would have certain biases. I mean, if you take Sub-Saharan Africa, definitely South Africa is well in advance compared to the other countries. Nigeria in West Africa is probably where capacity of absorption is the biggest, and from a technological perspective, quite in advance as well. If you look at North Africa, and if you take it from the angle of private sector investment mostly, I mean, Egypt is definitely the place to be. So, it really depends, actually, as you mentioned, on the macro environment, the currency environment, the access to land, the available technology, and what the purpose of the plant is. I mean, is that to feed in, purely locals, or is that the region, or is that an export-driven, market? So from our perspective, the idea is really to try to get into the comparative advantage of those countries, and to make sure that they are basically going a little bit more upward on the scale of processing and inserting themselves into global value chains, instead of just getting hard currency out of the export of cash crops.
And maybe one question for you, Abdulaziz: why don't we see more Arab entrepreneur? Is it something that, especially in that sector?
I would say it's not so much a nationality thing. It's more, you think to yourself when you're growing up, do you really think of agriculture as your typical career path? If you ask kids today where does food come from, they're going to say the supermarket. They're not going to say a farm, because that's what they're used to. So I think it's just a reimagining of what is possible. And once we have a few examples of successes, I think that's going to drive a huge interest in the space. But we already have a lot of students in this space. There's a lot of people who want to enter. I just think it's a question of a wave that's coming.
Yes, and Dr. Ismaili seems to be back. Maybe for the last few minutes before we close that webinar, your thoughts about how do we get more entrepreneur, how we get more SME, how we get more people engaged.
So I think we are at a turning point where things looking good. I think the connection between health and nutrition, health and food, it's a positive thing that I hope the new generation will pay attention to, the new agriculture with technology. So as Her Excellency Mariam will say, it's agripreneur, it's agri-technologist. So agriculture has to reborn itself in a most attractive way for young people. So I think what I'm seeing around, it's a burgeoning of new startup and new ideas. We need just to reinforce them. We need to give them space to grow. And we need to bring in the technologies. I got cut when I was talking about the gene editing. People might not be paying attention to it, but I think gene editing will completely transform the plant breeding worldwide. And hopefully countries that never had a plant breeding program, because it costs about $100 million to have one variety. But now with gene editing, that cost has been diminished at least 100%, almost 100 times. So I think gene editing will make a huge difference, and we need to bring it to the countries. It's very simple. We need to take it everywhere. And that's also, it's one of the aspects of universities, academia, government, to bring in the new technologies. Don't wait for the technology to be developed somewhere else. Once it exists, adopt it, put it in your academia, get people to experiment with it. So I think we need to shake a bit the other system that are supporting system to innovation, particularly academia and the research and innovation center like ICBA. So I see a lot of positive signs, and we need just to nurture them and get the right platform to bring them together.
Thank you very much. I think we are reaching the end of our webinars, and I'll pass the floor to our colleagues of the AEM meetings to close the session. I would like to really thank you all. There has been a lot of questions, to my dear participants, and some of you have already answered. Some are much more specific to either your African expertise. There are some for you, Salvatore, from Abu Dhabi. I'll let you all answer them to our participants so they can really get the specific answer, as we could not answer all the questions today. Thank you very much all for your participation. It was very nice and very enlightening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Mr. Matthew, and thank you to all our panel of experts. We have our polls result under the polls tab if you have to take a look at it. Thank you once again for joining us today and taking time from your schedule and sharing your thoughts and perspective with us. So I would like to thank once again our multilateral partner, Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector, and Etihad Credit Insurance for sponsoring today's webinar. If you would like to have more information about the services Etihad Credit Insurance has to offer, please visit the website www.ezi.gov.ae or email them at info@ezi.gov.ae. I would like to thank our audience for joining us and sharing their questions. The link to today's webinar video and presentations will be sent to you via email. We're also conducting a short survey to get your feedback on today's webinar. The link to the survey will be shared with you via the chat and via email. To register for our next webinar schedule for the 3rd of July 2020, please visit our website www.incongress.com/webinars. Also follow us on our social media channels to keep updated. Thank you all once again, and we look forward to seeing you on 3rd of July.